first time I understood the highway had stopped being a highway, I was already committed to the tunnel. I had been driving west through the Rockies with the heater on low and the radio turned down, trying to keep the cab quiet enough to think. The news had been ugly for 2 days, not dramatic, not cinematic, just ugly in a way that sounded worse every hour. Hospitals over capacity, people agitated and violent. A couple of towns where the sheriff told everyone to stay inside, the kind of language that means nobody in charge wants to admit what is happening, because admitting it would make the next step everyone's problem. The radio host kept saying, "We are getting conflicting reports." I kept driving because I was already on the road when the first videos hit. And the last thing I wanted was to be stuck in some parking lot with a crowd trying to guess what was true. Traffic had been heavy since the last big interchange, but it still moved. Lots of pickups with coolers in the bed, cars packed with suitcases, a few people towing trailers with more stuff than made sense for a quick trip. The lanes kept tightening through the passes, and every time a brake light flashed ahead, 10 more flashed behind it. I told myself to stay patient. I told myself the smartest move was to keep moving, get over the ridgeline, find a smaller town, sleep in the car if I had to, then decide what to do in the morning when the world either calmed down or got worse. That was the plan I could follow without spiraling. The tunnel came up fast, one of those older highway tunnels that cuts straight through a shoulder of rock instead of wrapping around the mountain. 2 lanes, concrete mouth, stained streaks where water had run down for years, a line of orange barrels on the right because something was always under repair somewhere. I saw the entrance and felt a thin bit of relief because tunnels mean fewer intersections, fewer exits, fewer people trying to cut across lanes. Then I saw the brake lights stacked tight in front of it, and the relief turned into that careful focus you get when you know you are about to spend the next 10 minutes avoiding someone else's mistake. A semi had stopped at an angle just before the mouth, not fully blocking it but forcing everyone to squeeze left. A sedan was pinned behind it with the hood bent up. People stood outside their cars, waving their arms and shouting at each other, which meant the situation was already beyond polite. I rolled my window down an inch and caught pieces of it, words carried by cold air and exhaust. He just stopped. There was a crash up ahead. No signal. Get back in your car. Nobody was coordinating. Nobody knew what the next driver was about to do. I waited for a gap and eased forward, creeping into the tunnel behind a white sport utility vehicle with a roof box strapped on top. The moment my car crossed the threshold, the sound changed. The wind noise fell away, replaced by the steady hum of tires on concrete and the echo of engines trapped in a tube. Tunnel lights were on, that sickly yellow line of fixtures running down the center. The air smelled damp, old water and road salt and fumes. I stayed in first gear ready to stop. Ahead, the line of cars crawled. Somewhere behind me, a horn blared and kept blaring. One long, angry note that bounced off the walls and made it hard to tell where it came from. About 100 feet in, the whole line jolted. Not a gentle stop, a hard, sudden check. The sport utility vehicle in front of me slammed brakes, the rear dipped, and I hit my own brakes and felt the tires chatter. The echo of impact ran through the tunnel. Not one crash, but multiple. A chain reaction. Someone behind me hit someone else. The horn that had been blaring changed pitch, then stopped. For half a second, there was a quiet that felt wrong. Then the shouting started. Doors opened. Footsteps on concrete. People yelling words I could not make out because the tunnel threw the sound back in fragments. Then the lights went out. Not a flicker. Not a dimming. One clean cut into darkness. My dashboard stayed lit, a weak glow that suddenly felt too bright. Ahead, red taillights and brake lights became the only points of reference, scattered, uneven. Some cars had hazard lights, orange flashes that pulsed and made shadows jump across the tunnel walls. My first thought was power failure. My second thought came right behind it. Something hit the lines, or the control room lost staffing, or the grid was failing everywhere, and this was just another place going dark. A sound rolled through the tunnel that made me freeze with my hands still on the steering wheel. It was not an engine. It was not a crash. It was the mountain moving, stone grinding, dust shifting, a deep rumble that seemed to come from both ends at once. People screamed, the kind of scream that is not meant for other people, just a body reacting. I ducked low without thinking. Something hit the roof of my car, a sharp crack, then another, and grit showered down the windshield. I sat up and forced myself to look forward through the darkness and blinking lights. Dust hung in the air, catching what little light there was. Far ahead, near the entrance we had come through, I could see a pale cloud expanding. Another rumble, shorter, then a series of smaller impacts that sounded like rocks hitting concrete and metal. More screaming. A chorus of car alarms started, then stopped, then started again, as if the alarms could not decide whether to commit. I had one clean thought. Both ends could be blocked now. I put the car in park, shut the engine off, and grabbed my phone. No signal, not even a weak bar. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward the windshield. Dust swirled in front of the beam. The sport utility vehicle's rear hatch was open now, a silhouette of a man leaning in, yanking something out. Someone else ran past my driver's side, footsteps hard and fast, then slowed, then stopped to shout at somebody behind. I opened my door slowly, keeping it tight so I did not clip the car next to me. Cold air hit my face and carried the smell of dust and brake heat. My flashlight beam cut across the lane and found faces. People were already gathering between the stopped cars, phone lights up, turning the tunnel into a scattered constellation of white beams. Somebody was crying. Somebody else was swearing in short bursts, not even full sentences, just noise. "Turn your engines off," I called, loud enough to carry, but not screaming. "Turn them off. We cannot sit in here with exhaust." A few people looked at me. A few ignored me. A man in a puffy jacket near the center line yelled back something about needing heat. I kept my voice steady and pointed at the ceiling. "No ventilation. Power is out. If we keep engines running, we poison ourselves. Turn them off." A woman climbed out of a sedan 2 cars ahead. Her hair pulled back tight, her face lit from below by her phone. She looked around, took in the stopped line, the dust, the darkness. Then she started moving car to car, tapping on windows, signaling drivers to shut down. That was all I needed. If one other person acted calm, the rest might follow. I stepped forward carefully between bumpers and doors. The concrete underfoot was gritty. My flashlight found a man sitting on the ground with his back against a wheel well, holding his wrist. Another person crouched next to him, talking fast. I kept moving, scanning for blood, scanning for somebody pinned or crushed. There was a difference between a pileup and a catastrophe, and I needed to know which one this was. A voice called out, "Is anyone hurt?" It came from farther up, female, controlled. The same woman who had started tapping windows. I moved toward her light. She had a small first aid kit in her hands, the cheap kind you keep in a glove box. She looked at me for half a second, then pointed. He hit his head. He keeps trying to stand up. I went to the man she indicated. He was tall, gray hair, dressed for travel. He had that unfocused look, the one that tells you he is trying to pretend he is fine, because admitting he is not fine makes everything worse. I put a hand up, palm out. Stay seated. Take a minute. Do not stand up yet." He opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to reconsider. He swallowed and stayed down. The woman with the kit knelt and checked him with quick hands. She did not introduce herself. She did not waste words. She worked. That made me trust her more than any speech would have. From the entrance end, another rumble came, smaller than the first, but still heavy. Dust fell again. People flinched and ducked. Somebody yelled, "The tunnel is collapsing!" The sound bounced and multiplied until it felt as if 10 people were yelling it at once. "It is not collapsing," the woman said, sharp enough to cut through the echo. "If it was collapsing, we would know. Stay where you are." I took that as permission to do what I already wanted to do. I started walking back toward the entrance end, keeping my flashlight beam low to avoid blinding people. The line of cars behind me was packed tighter than I realized, and the crash had created a knot of metal and glass near the mouth. The air was thicker there, dustier. The screaming had dropped into murmur and occasional sharp outbursts. People were still outside vehicles, stepping around each other, phones up, trying to record, trying to call, trying to make the moment real by capturing it. When I got close enough to see the tunnel mouth, my stomach dropped. The opening was no longer a clean curve of daylight. It was partially filled with rock and broken concrete, a jagged wall that had shoved inward. Cars near the mouth were crushed at angles, trapped by the slide. Daylight still came through, but it was thin and dirty, filtered by dust. Outside, beyond the rubble, I could see nothing but a white haze and the shapes of stopped vehicles on the approach, blocked in both directions. I shouted back down the tunnel, "The entrance is blocked. Do not go up there." A few people heard. A few kept moving toward it anyway, pulled by the idea of open air. One man climbed over a hood and tried to scramble up the rubble. A woman grabbed his sleeve. He yanked free. He kept climbing until a rock shifted, and he slid down hard, landing on his side. He stayed there for a moment, stunned, then pushed himself up and tried again. I walked closer, but stopped short of the unstable pile. "It is not safe," I said. "You start a slide inside this tunnel, we all get buried." He turned his head toward my light. His face was streaked with dust and sweat. "So we just sit here?" he snapped. "We sit until we know what is happening," I said. "Or we find a way that does not bring the whole ceiling down." From outside, beyond the rubble, something moved. At first it was just a shape in the dust. Then the shape stumbled forward, arms loose, head tilted. Another shape behind it. Then another. The way they moved was wrong for people trying to climb debris. It was slow, uneven, but determined. The kind of motion that does not adjust when it should. The man on the rubble saw it too. His posture changed. He stopped talking. He stopped moving. His head lifted slightly, as if he was trying to convince himself it was not what he thought. One of the shapes reached the rubble and started pushing at it with open hands. Not testing, not climbing, just pressing into it, face close, mouth opening and closing. A woman behind me whispered, "No." The shapes outside made sounds that carried through the gap. Not words, not coherent yelling. Raw noises, strained and repetitive, as if the same impulse was stuck in a loop. The man on the rubble stepped backward too fast, lost footing, slid down again and landed in a heap. He did not get up right away this time. He crawled backward, eyes locked on the entrance. I backed away too, keeping my light on the rubble. I did not want to stand there and stare, but the information mattered. There were infected outside. Not one, more than one, and if noise drew them, The tunnel entrance was now a funnel that could bring them right to us. I turned and walked fast back down the tunnel, weaving through cars, stepping around open doors. "Listen," I called out, raising my voice. "The entrance is blocked and infected are outside. Nobody goes near the rubble. Nobody makes noise for no reason. We stay away from both ends until we understand our options." That got attention. People stopped moving. A few laughed nervously, the kind of laugh that tries to turn fear into a joke. Others started talking all at once. Questions, arguments. I kept moving because staying in a crowd is how panic spreads. The woman with the first aid kit met me near the middle of the tunnel. Her phone light caught my face. "What did you see?" "Infected at the entrance rubble," I said. "They cannot get in yet, but they are right there. They push into the gaps." She nodded once, no dramatics. "Then we do not feed them sound." A man in a work jacket stepped closer, his hands full of tools pulled from a trunk, a wrench and a pry bar. His face was calm in a way that felt practiced. "Name is Grant," he said. "I do maintenance for a ski resort. Ventilation in here is dead without power. If we stay long, air matters." I nodded at him. I was thinking the same thing. The woman finally gave a name too. "I am Marisol," she said. "I did nursing for years. I am not here to be anyone's boss. But if someone gets hurt, I handle it. If someone is sick, I need to know." Her eyes held on mine a second longer. The message was clear. If infection spreads inside, it ends fast. We needed structure, not speeches. I walked the line of stopped cars with Grant, looking for anything that looked different. About 200 feet from where the pileup had densest damage set into the right wall, I found what I was hoping for. A maintenance alcove with a steel door, painted a faded green, with a small placard that was too dirty to read. The door had a heavy latch, not a flimsy office door, a real service door meant to keep people out. Grant ran his hand along the frame. "This is good," he said. "This is our only solid boundary in here." I tried the handle. Locked. Grant lifted the pry bar, looked at me. I shook my head. "Not yet," I said. "If we start prying and smashing, that noise pulls the infected. We need to decide when noise is worth it." He nodded, and I liked him for that. People who can pause are valuable. We walked farther down, toward the other end of the tunnel. The exit end had fewer cars stacked tight, which meant more space, which meant less immediate stress. But it also meant more unknown. If the exit was clear, people would already be walking out. The fact that nobody was returning from that direction told me the exit was blocked too, or worse. We reached a point where the tunnel curved slightly and the darkness felt heavier. The air was cooler there. I could hear water dripping somewhere, steady, faint, the kind of sound you barely notice until you need it. Then I saw the second collapse. Not as big as the entrance, but enough. A slope of rock and concrete had poured into the exit mouth. A couple of cars were jammed into it. Beyond the pile there was daylight, but it was blocked by dust and the angle. I could hear sounds beyond, distant yelling, then a sudden sharp scream that ended abruptly. Grant and I stopped and listened. The scream had the same raw edge I heard from outside at the entrance. Not words, not clear, just noise. Then another, closer. Then a banging on metal from outside, rhythmic, repeated. Grant's voice dropped. Infected on both ends. "Then this is a sealed tube with pressure at both ends," I said. "We pick a spot in the middle and lock it down." We went back, and this time I did not ask permission. I used my car's tire iron and the pry bar Grant carried, working in turns, slow and controlled. We wedged the bar at the latch, applied pressure, listened for shifting rock noises, waited, then pushed again. The metal groaned. It sounded too loud in the tunnel. I hated every second of it, but the alternative was sleeping in the open lane with no barrier while infected pressed at rubble within shouting distance. The latch finally snapped free with a hard metallic pop. I froze and listened. The tunnel held its breath with me. Somewhere far off, a faint chorus answered, drawn by the sound. It was distant, but it made the hair on my arms rise. Grant and I slipped through the door fast and pulled it shut behind us. Inside was a narrow room, concrete walls, shelves with old supplies, a metal cabinet, a workbench bolted to the floor. The air smelled stale but not rotten. There was a service panel on the wall, dead. A ladder led up into a square shaft with a metal grate overhead. Ventilation, access, a way to move air if we could keep it clear. Grant flashed his light up the shaft. "This is our chimney," he said. "If we run a stove, we vent it here. If we can open the grate, we might get a path to the surface." I looked around fast, inventory without making it a list in my head. A few orange safety vests, cones, a case of road flares, a small dry chemical fire extinguisher, 2 dusty 5-gallon water jugs that were empty, a roll of heavy trash bags, a crate of old gloves. Not luxury, but it was a base. We went back out and gathered people, not everyone, just the ones who looked able to follow rules. Marisol came. Grant came. A younger woman in a hoodie came after watching everyone argue for 10 minutes without moving toward a plan. Her name was Tessa, early 20s. She kept her phone light pointed down, conserving battery, and she listened more than she talked. A truck driver named Walt came too, mid-50s, thick hands, calm eyes. He had been on the road long enough to understand that comfort is optional and routine is survival. He did not ask questions first. He asked what needed to be done. We also ended up with a couple, Ethan and Brooke, both in hiking clothes, the kind of people who had planned a weekend trip and got trapped in something bigger. Brooke's hands shook when she tried to open her water bottle. She held it tight to hide it. Ethan kept stepping away from her to talk to other people, trying to be useful, trying to keep himself from sitting still and thinking. Not everyone wanted to join. A man named Daryl insisted the tunnel was going to be cleared any minute. He kept saying, "State Patrol will come, and there are cameras." His voice kept rising. He tried to get other people to go help dig at the exit end. I told him no. I told him digging without a plan would bring infected into the tunnel. He called me paranoid. He walked away angry. We shut the steel door and set the latch. It did not lock from inside, but it latched tight, and we shoved the workbench against it anyway. Walt volunteered to stand at the door when anyone needed to come in or out. No crowding, no surprise openings. If someone panicked, Walt would be the first thing in his path, and that mattered. The first hours were about quiet work. We went car to car, taking only what mattered and doing it without slamming doors. Water bottles, protein bars, coats, blankets, flashlights, batteries, first aid kits, hand sanitizer, a small camping stove from a family's trunk, still in the box, a pack of tea light candles, a set of mechanic tools, duct tape, a folding saw. The tunnel became a grocery store and hardware aisle for anyone willing to move carefully. Marisol established one rule that nobody argued with once she said it. "If anyone has a bite, say it now," she told the group in the alcove. "If anyone has blood on a hand, wash it now. If anyone got sprayed in the face during the crash, tell me. I am not punishing anyone. I am trying to keep this room from turning into a problem we cannot solve." Nobody admitted anything. That did not reassure me. It just meant fear was already making people hide information. Tessa found a case of bottled water in the back of a minivan and carried it with both arms, jaw clenched with effort. She set it on the floor and looked at me. "How long do you think this is going to be?" "I do not know," I said, "so we act as if it is long. That way, if it is short, we win early." The tunnel did what tunnels do. It amplified every mistake. A dropped wrench sounded huge. A shouted argument turned into a rolling wall of noise that pulled attention from both ends. At one point, someone farther down fired a road flare, maybe trying to signal outside. The flare hissed and threw red light across the walls. It also threw sound. And within minutes, the infected noises at the entrance end grew louder, closer. The flare burned out, and the person who lit it went quiet. But the damage was done. We heard scratching and pushing at the rubble for almost an hour afterward. We set rules without turning it into a meeting. No flares, no yelling, no car alarms allowed to keep screaming. Walt and Grant went down the line and popped hoods where they could, pulling battery cables on the worst offenders. It was hard work in the dark. People complained until the infected answered from the rubble. Then complaints turned into silence. In our alcove, we built a small living space that did not require imagination. Blankets on the floor, supplies on shelves, a corner designated for waste lined with heavy trash bags inside a plastic storage bin we pulled from a sport utility vehicle. We used cat litter from someone's trunk to keep odor down. It was not dignified, but it was controlled. Marisol insisted on hand cleaning afterward every time, no exceptions. She made it routine so nobody could argue without looking reckless. Night in the tunnel did not mean the same thing it means outside. It was already dark. What changed was people's internal clock giving up. Phones dimmed. Flashlight batteries started dying. The tunnel's cold crept in and stayed. Without engines and without tunnel fans, the air took on a heavy stillness, the kind that makes every small sound feel too sharp. Grant set up the camping stove under the service shaft, and he did it with care that told me he had thought about the risk before. He ran a length of flexible tubing he scavenged from a camper's storage compartment up toward the grate, then sealed the gaps with duct tape. He lit the stove low, just enough to take the edge off the cold, and watched the flame. He held a strip of tissue near the tubing to confirm air was pulling upward. He did not declare it safe. He just worked until it behaved the way he needed. Walt warmed his hands without hovering. Brooke sat with her knees hugged tight, staring at the door. Ethan paced in short loops, stopping every few steps to listen to the tunnel. Tessa took her phone off airplane mode out of habit, checked for signal again, then turned it back off and tucked it away, saving power for when it mattered. I sat near the door with my back against the concrete wall and forced myself to plan. Not grand plans, immediate ones: water count, food count, light sources. If someone got hurt, where would Marisol treat him? If infected got inside, what barrier could we use? If the tunnel filled with smoke, how would we move? The only thing that kept panic from taking over was deciding what I would do if the next bad thing happened. It was close to midnight when the first real test hit. A man ran down the tunnel shouting, his footsteps slapping the concrete, his voice bouncing off the walls until it sounded as if he was everywhere at once. He was Daryl, the one who had refused our alcove. He had a flashlight beam swinging wild, cutting across cars and faces. "Open up!" he yelled. "Open the door!" Walt moved before I did, putting his body in front of the steel door, one hand on the latch, The other raised. "Stop shouting," Walt said, low but firm. "Walk, do not run. If you bring them, you do not bring them to this door." Daryl kept moving, breath ragged, eyes wide. He grabbed the door handle. Walt slapped his hand away, not violent, just decisive. "Tell me," Walt said. "Quiet." Daryl swallowed and forced his voice down. "There is one inside," he whispered, and that whisper still sounded loud in the tunnel. "One of them got in at the exit end. It crawled through a gap. It is in here." Grant and I exchanged a glance. Marisol stood up slowly, as if sudden movement would set something off. "Where is it now?" she asked. Daryl shook his head fast. "I do not know. It was on the cars. It fell, then got up. It started walking. People ran. Someone got grabbed." Marisol's voice stayed level. "Who?" Daryl's eyes flicked away. "A guy. I do not know his name." That answer hit harder than the news of an infected inside. Not knowing someone's name meant people had been trapped together for hours and still stayed strangers. That is how groups fail. Walt opened the door just enough to pull Daryl inside, then shut it again and shoved the bench tight. Daryl stood there shaking, looking at all of us, then looking down at the floor, ashamed of his own noise. I did not lecture him. I needed him to calm down, not to defend his ego. Grant grabbed his pry bar and flashlight. "We cannot pretend it will not come here," he said. "If it can walk this tunnel, it follows sound." "Then we become quiet enough that it loses interest," I said, "and we keep this door shut." We killed the stove flame to reduce any smell and any faint hiss. We dimmed all lights. We sat still, listening. In the distance, the tunnel carried new sounds. Footsteps running, a door slamming, a car alarm starting, then cutting off. Then, faint but clear, the dragging scrape of something moving along concrete, hands or shoes, hard to tell. The scrape would stop, then start again. It moved in fits, not smooth. Minutes stretched. Nobody spoke. Brooke's eyes stayed locked on the steel door. Ethan held her hand, squeezing without looking at her. Tessa picked up a wrench and held it across her lap, knuckles white. Walt leaned close to the door, listening with his head tilted. Not dramatic, just trying to place distance. A thud hit the steel door. Not a gentle bump, a full body impact. The entire door shivered, the workbench shifting a fraction. Brooke jerked back. Ethan pulled her closer. Walt planted both feet and pressed his shoulder against the doorframe. Another thud, then a scraping sound along the bottom edge, fingers or nails or something hard searching for gap. Marisol stepped forward and put her palm on Walt's arm, not to stop him, but to anchor him. Her other hand pointed at me, then at Grant. She did not have to say it. If the door gave, we had to act fast. Grant raised the pry bar and positioned himself at the hinge side. I grabbed the fire extinguisher and pulled the pin halfway, ready. Not because I thought it would kill anything, but because it could blind, disrupt, buy seconds without making a mess that would haunt us. Walt kept pressure on the door. The infected hit it again, then paused. It pushed, slow and constant, testing. Then the sound changed. A voice, human, strained, close to the door. "Help," it whispered. "Open it." Brooke started to move toward the latch. Ethan grabbed her wrist and stopped her. His face was pale in the dim light. He shook his head once, hard. Marisol leaned closer to the door, careful not to touch the latch. "Who are you?" she asked. A pause. Then the voice again, weaker. "I am hurt. Please." Marisol's voice did not change. "Name." Another pause. A wet sound, breath moving through a mouth that could not decide what to do. The voice tried again. "Please." Walt's jaw clenched. He did not move. Grant's eyes were fixed on the latch. Tessa held her wrench tighter. Marisol spoke once more, sharp and clear. "Name." No answer. Then a sudden slam against the door that did not match a wounded person leaning in. It was a full-force hit, violent and impatient. The voice stopped being human. It became noise, raw and repetitive, pressed through teeth. The infected had heard us, and it had learned a trick, or it had repeated a sound it had heard before. Either way, it was not someone we could save. We did not open the door. The infected hit the door for a long time. It shifted position, scraping along the edges, pushing at the latch. Walt stayed there, silent, unmoving, taking the impacts through his shoulder and legs. When his stance started to sag, Grant took his place for a minute. Then Walt came back. We rotated without talking. Marisol kept her eyes on Brooke and Ethan, watching for the moment compassion turned into a mistake. I hated that I was grateful for her doing it, but I was. Eventually, the impacts slowed. The scraping moved away. The tunnel grew quiet again except for distant noises at the rubble ends, a constant low pressure that never stopped. We waited longer than felt reasonable, because leaving early is how people die. When morning finally arrived in our minds, not in the tunnel, we lit the stove again for a minute and drank small sips of water. We rationed immediately, not because we wanted to be cruel, but because water in a sealed tunnel is not a comfort item. It is life. We marked bottles with tape and names. We made it boring. Boring keeps people from making emotional trades at midnight. Daryl tried to talk his way into a bigger share, saying he had done a lot of work down the tunnel. Walt shut that down without raising his voice. "Everyone in here is alive because everyone in here did not open that door," Walt said. "You get the same as everyone else." Daryl's eyes flashed, offended, but he backed off. He was not brave enough to start a fight in a room where nobody looked impressed by him. We spent the next day making the tunnel outside our alcove safer in small ways. Not hero moves, practical ones. We moved cars to create choke points, pushing them by hand with groups of 3, tires squealing slightly on grit. We did it in silence, communicating with hand signals and light taps. We set up a line of cones and reflective triangles to guide us back to the alcove in the dark. We marked the wall with strips of duct tape at shoulder height so a flashlight beam would catch it. Grant located 2 more service doors along the tunnel, both locked. We left them alone for now. He found a drain channel running along the base of the wall, carrying a thin trickle of water toward a grated outlet. It was not much, but it was water. We traced it back and found the drip source, condensation and seepage from the mountain, gathering at a crack where the concrete met rock. It was slow, steady. We set a clean plastic bin under it and covered it with a piece of cloth as a filter for grit. Marisol insisted we still treat it. We boiled small batches on the stove, then let it cool in sealed bottles. It tasted like minerals and concrete, but it did not taste like fear. In the afternoon, we heard shouting from down the tunnel, closer to the exit end. Not frantic, angry. 2 voices, then a scuffle, feet scraping, a crash of something metal hitting the ground. Then a sudden silence that felt forced. Walt and I moved toward the sound, with our lights low. Grant came behind, pry bar in hand. Marisol stayed back with Tessa and Brooke. Ethan followed us anyway, jaw tight, unable to sit still. We found the source near a cluster of cars where people had tried to build their own camp. A man was on the ground, not unconscious but pinned, his arms held behind by another man kneeling on his back. The man on top had a knife in his hand, not waving it, just holding it with the calm intent of someone who wanted leverage. Two other people stood back, frozen, not sure whose side to pick. Walt stepped into the edge of the light and spoke low. "Put it down." The man with the knife looked up. His face was gaunt, eyes too bright. "He tried to steal our food," he said. The pinned man tried to twist, then froze when the knife shifted closer. "I was hungry," he said, voice tight. "Everyone is hungry." Walt did not argue the emotion. He challenged the logic. You stab him, you get blood in the tunnel, you get screaming, you get the ends pressing in, you get sick people. Put it down. The knife man hesitated. That hesitation was enough for me to see he was not committed to murder yet. He wanted control, not necessarily death. I stepped closer, showing my empty hands. "We can handle theft without killing," I said. "We can separate camps, we can set rules, but you cannot pull a knife in here and pretend it stays private." Grant moved one step to the side, quietly, putting himself between the knife man and the rest of the tunnel. Not threatening, just positioned. Ethan stood behind me, breathing through his nose, fists clenched, trying to hold himself back from doing something stupid. The knife man looked at Walt, then at me, then at Grant. He slowly set the knife on the ground and slid it away with his boot. Walt nodded once. "Get off him." The man got off. The pinned man rolled over and sat up, rubbing his wrists. His eyes were wet, angry, and embarrassed. Walt pointed at him. "You steal again. You do not come near our alcove. You do not come near anyone's supplies. You live with the consequences." Then Walt pointed at the knife man. "You pull a blade again. You do not come near our alcove either. You can be hungry without being dangerous." Nobody cheered. Nobody thanked us. The tunnel absorbed the moment and kept being a tunnel. We walked back because there was nothing else to do that would actually help. On the third day, the infected inside the tunnel returned. We heard it before we saw it. The scrape, the uneven footfalls, the intermittent thud of a body leaning into a car door. Walt and I were out collecting batteries from a hardware case in a trunk when the sound shifted closer. Our beams caught movement ahead, a figure between cars, head angled, arms loose, clothing dirty. It moved toward the nearest sound, which was not us yet, but a group of people arguing near the center line, voices raised. I did not shout. Shouting would bring it faster. I turned my light off and waved Walt down, then pointed. Walt's face tightened. He moved without noise, stepping behind a pickup, using the vehicle as cover. I did the same, and we waited, watching the infected drift toward the argument. The arguing people saw it at the last second. One of them screamed, high and sharp. The infected surged faster, driven by sound, not by strategy. The group scattered, feet pounding. That pounding pulled more noises from the ends. I heard infected pushing at rubble, answering. The infected reached the nearest person, grabbed at a sleeve, and the person yanked away hard. Fabric tore. The person stumbled and fell, not because the infected was strong, but because panic makes movement clumsy. The infected dropped on him, hands pushing, mouth snapping forward. Walt moved, and he moved with a decision that told me he had already promised himself what he would do if this happened. He grabbed a long tire iron from the ground and drove it down between the infected and the fallen man, not stabbing, just using it as a wedge, forcing distance. He shouted one word, "Up!" and the fallen man scrambled backward, feet slipping on grit, then got traction and ran. The infected turned toward Walt's shout. Walt backed away fast without running, controlling his steps, drawing the infected toward a line of cars we had positioned earlier. He led it into the choke point and slipped sideways through a gap between bumpers that the infected could not navigate cleanly without slowing. The infected hit a fender and kept pushing against it, stuck in a loop. I used that moment to grab a road cone and shove it under the infected's feet, tipping its balance. It fell to its knees, then tried to stand, slipping, hands scraping concrete. No blood, no gore. Just a relentless body that did not care about pain. We backed away and left it trapped between cars. It would not stay trapped forever, but it bought time, and time was the only currency the tunnel gave us. When we got back to the alcove, Marisol took one look at Walt's sleeves and asked, "Any contact?" Walt shook his head. No bite, no blood. She nodded, satisfied, then looked at me. "You keep seeing how thin this is," she said. "I see it," I answered. "So we make the thin parts thicker." That night, Grant climbed the ladder into the service shaft and worked the grate with a wrench and steady pressure. The metal complained. Dust fell. The sound carried. We paused twice to listen for increased activity at the rubble ends. When the tunnel stayed quiet, Grant continued. The grate finally loosened enough to shift. A thin stream of colder air dropped into the alcove, carrying the smell of snow and pine and open space. It was the first time the tunnel smelled connected to the outside world since we got trapped. Brooke started crying quietly, not dramatic, just a leak she could not stop. Grant whispered, "We can open this." I stared up at the square of darkness above the grate. "Can we get out?" "Maybe not today," Grant said, "but we can move air. We can vent smoke properly. We can run the stove without guessing." Marisol looked at the grate, then at the steel door. "And if someone gets infected inside," she said, "we have an option that does not involve opening the main door." She was right. The shaft was not just a chimney. It was a controlled exit, narrow, defensible, and hidden from both rubble ends. It was the difference between being trapped and having a plan. On day 4, the secret everyone had been hiding finally surfaced. Ethan came to Marisol in the early hours, when the tunnel was quiet and the stove was off. He looked exhausted, not from lack of sleep, but from holding something back. He kept his voice low. "Brooke has a cut," he said. "From the crash. It is not a bite." Marisol's expression did not change, but her eyes hardened. "Show me," she said. Brooke sat on the floor with her sleeve rolled up. The cut was on her forearm, shallow, jagged from glass. It had been cleaned at some point, but not well. Marisol asked one question that mattered. "Did anyone else's blood touch it?" Brooke hesitated, then nodded once. Her voice was small. "When the cars hit, there was someone at my window. He was bleeding. I pushed him away. I did not think." Marisol closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them and leaned in. "We do not hide this," she said. "We do not pretend it is fine. We watch it. We isolate you if we need to. We do not punish you for being scared. But we do not let fear make decisions in secret." Ethan tried to speak, but Marisol cut him off. "You do not get to decide what is safe alone," she said. "Not here." We set up a quarantine corner in the alcove, separated by hanging blankets. Brooke stayed there with water and food, the same ration as everyone else. Ethan wanted to sit with her constantly. Marisol allowed it with rules. Hand cleaning before and after, no touching her wound, no contact with shared supplies afterward until hands were cleaned again. It was strict, It was necessary. Brooke did not turn immediately. That was the next test, the waiting. Hours passed. Her eyes stayed clear. Her speech stayed coherent. The cut reddened but did not erupt into something monstrous. We changed the dressing, kept it clean, kept watching. The tension did not show up in pounding hearts. It showed up in how often people checked the blankets hanging between her and us. Daryl watched too, and he watched with the wrong kind of interest. He stood near the door more often. He listened at the steel door longer. His gaze flicked to the supplies on shelves. He was calculating, not comforting. On day 5, he made his move. I caught him with his hands on the workbench, shifting it away from the door, trying to create a gap. He froze when my light hit him. His face went hard. "We cannot stay here," he hissed. "We have to dig. You have to open the door so we can get people to help. More hands, more tools. You open this door and you bring the tunnel's problems into this room," I said. "You know that." He leaned closer, voice low and sharp. "You are sitting on the best spot," he said. "You have water, you have heat, you are keeping it for yourself." "That is not true," I said. "You had the option to join on day 1. You refused." His eyes flicked past me toward the blankets where Brooke lay. "She is infected," he said. "You all know it. You are waiting to die." Marisol stepped into the doorway space behind me, silent, and Daryl's posture changed when he saw her. He did not want to argue with her because she carried authority that did not require volume. "She is not infected," Marisol said, "and if she becomes infected, I will be the first to tell you. You will not use fear to take control of this door." Daryl's jaw worked. He glanced at Walt, who had moved behind him without Daryl noticing, blocking his escape path. Walt did not touch him. Walt did not threaten him. He just stood there and waited for Daryl to understand the room's balance of power. Daryl swallowed and stepped back. "Fine," he muttered. "Stay in your hole." "Leave," Walt said. Daryl hesitated. Walt said it again, same tone. "Leave." Daryl left. He did not slam the door, because he knew what would happen if he did. But his footsteps down the tunnel were loud enough to make a point. I watched his light fade and felt a new kind of unease settle in. Infected were a pressure at the ends. Daryl was a pressure inside. The tunnel had both kinds. That night, the infected returned to our door again, and this time it was not alone. We heard multiple impacts, staggered, one body slamming, then another, scraping along the bottom edge, a hand brushing the latch, then slipping. The chorus of noise outside the door was not coordinated, but it was relentless. It had found us again. We did the same thing we did before, bench tight, lights low, silence. Walt braced, Grant positioned, fire extinguisher ready. Marisol kept everyone back. We did not speak. Then we heard Daryl's voice from outside the door, and it was not imitation this time. It was him. "Open it," he said, and he was trying to keep his voice low, but fear kept cracking it. "Open it right now." Walt did not move. "Where are you?" Walt asked. "Right here," Daryl whispered. "I ran, they followed. Just open it and I will get in." Marisol stepped forward. "Are you bitten?" she asked. Silence. "Answer," Marisol said. Daryl's voice came back, too fast. "No." Walt leaned his head closer to the door and listened. He looked at me, then at Grant. Grant's eyes were fixed on the gap under the door where dust had gathered. He whispered, barely audible, "If he is not bitten, he can go down the tunnel and get in through the shaft if we open it." Marisol nodded once. "Tell him," she said. Walt spoke to the door, controlled. Go to the wall mark with 2 strips of tape, then wait. Do not shout. We will open the shaft grate and you climb in. If you are bitten, you do not come in." Daryl's breath hitched. "I cannot," he whispered. "They are right here." Another slam hit the door hard, and the workbench shifted. A scraping sound slid across the concrete right outside, bodies moving, pressing. Daryl made a small sound that he tried to swallow. Marisol's voice cut through. "If you cannot move, then you are already lost," she said. "Do not bring this door down." The words were brutal, but they were honest. I watched Brooke through the blanket gap, awake now, eyes wide, listening, knowing this moment was about her too, because Daryl had already decided in his mind that she was the reason he deserved to take control. Daryl's voice rose despite himself. "You cannot leave me out here." Walt's voice stayed low. "Move." Daryl did not move. Instead, his hands started hammering on the door, desperate, loud. The infected answered that hammering with renewed force. The impacts multiplied. The door shuddered harder. The latch groaned. Grant lunged to the bench and shoved with his shoulder to keep it tight. Walt pressed harder. I grabbed the fire extinguisher and sprayed a short burst at the bottom seam of the door, not because I thought it would stop the infected, but because the chemical cloud might disrupt anything trying to see or smell through the gap. Outside, Daryl screamed, full volume now. The tunnel took his scream and flung it down both directions. The noises at the rubble ends rose in response. The whole system woke up. Then, suddenly, Daryl stopped screaming. Not because he calmed down, because something cut the sound off. There was a wet, choking noise, then a heavy thud against the door, then another thud as a body slid down. No gore, no details, just the absence of his voice and the new scraping at the door that did not sound human anymore. Brooke made a small sound behind the blanket, and Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, holding her steady without speaking. Tessa stared at the door, face blank, trying to process the speed of it. Marisol turned her head away for a second, then faced the door again. "No more talking," she whispered. We held the door through the night. By morning, the impacts faded. The infected drifted away, pulled by other noises deeper in the tunnel, the echoes of panic from camps that did not have steel doors and quiet rules. We did not go out to look for Daryl, not because we did not care, because the tunnel punished curiosity. Grant climbed the shaft ladder and pushed the grate open fully for the first time. Cold air poured in stronger. He shined his light upward. "There is a hatch above," he said. "Another 10 feet. It might lead out." Walt looked at me. "We do not stay here forever," he said. "We stay until we can leave without feeding the ends," I said. "But you are right." We spent the next 2 days preparing for a controlled exit, not a heroic one. We packed only what could be carried without clattering. Water bottles wrapped in cloth, food sealed in bags, a small stove, matches, flashlights with fresh batteries. Marisol packed medical supplies first, then a second set in case the first got dropped. Grant packed tools that could open things quietly, not smash them. Walt packed a heavy wrench and a flashlight, and he did not talk about what he planned to do with the wrench if something came at them. Brooke's cut stayed clean. No fever, no confusion. The redness faded. Ethan's posture slowly released its tightness. He still looked at the blankets too often, but the fear was shifting into exhaustion, which was its own danger. Exhaustion makes people sloppy. Tessa surprised me on the last evening before we climbed. She sat near the stove, eyes on the small flame, and said quietly, "You did not promise anyone rescue." I cannot promise what I do not control, I said. She nodded. That helps, she said. People keep promising things outside this tunnel. It got everyone hurt. We climbed out at night. Grant went first, because he understood the shaft. Walt followed, because if something waited at the hatch, Walt needed to be the first body it met. I went third. Marisol came next, Tessa after her, Ethan and Brooke last, moving slow and careful. The ladder rungs were cold and damp. My hands slipped once, and the scrape of my boot against the wall sounded too loud. I froze, listened for answering movement in the tunnel below. Nothing immediate. Still, I moved slower, controlling every step. At the top, Grant worked the hatch with a wrench, turning bolts a quarter turn at a time. Pausing between turns, the hatch finally lifted a fraction, and a thin blade of night air cut in, sharp and clean. Grant pushed it open just enough for a head and shoulders. He looked out, then pulled back and whispered, "Snow, trees, no lights, no people." Walt went up and scanned longer. He nodded once. Clear. We emerged onto a slope above the tunnel, tucked in a patch of scrub and rock. The snow was shallow but crunchy. The sky was clear enough to show stars. The highway below was not visible from our angle, but we could hear it in a way. The faint, distant echo of the tunnel itself, a low murmur of trapped sound. We stayed low and moved away from the hatch, covering it with brush again once everyone was out. Grant marked the spot with a small strip of tape on a nearby rock, not visible from a distance, but visible to him. We did not want to lose the tunnel. The tunnel had become our base, whether we wanted to admit it or not. We walked uphill for a quarter mile, slow, watching our footing. No talking, no flashlights unless needed. When we reached a cluster of trees, we stopped and listened. The world outside was not peaceful, but it was open. Wind moved through branches. Snow shifted under boots. Those normal sounds felt unfamiliar after days of concrete and echo. From far below, somewhere on the road approach, we heard a faint chorus of infected noise carried by the cold air. It reminded me that the mountain did not erase the outbreak. It just changed the shape of it. We did not march off into a fantasy escape. We did what made sense. We found a small maintenance shed half buried in snow, a place meant for crews to store tools and salt. The door was locked, but Grant opened it with careful work, not smashing. Inside, we found shovels, a bag of ice melt, a couple of old tarps, and most importantly, shelter from wind. We sat on the floor and drank small sips of water. Walt kept the door cracked just enough to listen. Marisol checked Brooke's arm again under flashlight, then checked everyone's hands for cuts. Ethan stared at the wall for a long time, then finally whispered, "We are out." "We are above," I corrected, "because words matter. Out means we can leave and keep leaving. We are above the trap. That is step one." Grant looked at me. "You are going back," he said. I did not deny it. "The tunnel is a defensible position," I said. "It has supplies. It has a steel door. It has a water drip. It has a shaft exit now. If we walk into the woods with 6 people and limited food, we become a moving problem. If we return to the tunnel and make it smarter, we become stable." Marisol nodded slowly. "Stability first," she said, "then choices." We slept in shifts in the maintenance shed, not because it was comfortable, but because exhaustion makes people careless. In the early morning, we moved again, circling down toward the hatch with the sun still low. We kept distance from the highway. We watched for movement. We saw none. When we dropped back into the shaft and sealed the hatch above, the tunnel's air hit me with damp cold and exhaust residue. Familiar now. I hated that familiar feeling, and also trusted it more than the open world outside. That is what a shelter does. It turns into a habit. We returned to our alcove and found it intact. The door held. The bench stayed where we left it. The supplies were undisturbed. The tunnel outside was quiet, with only distant noises at the ends. The trapped infected we had wedged between cars was gone, which told me it was still roaming somewhere in the dark, still a threat. Nothing stays solved for long. Over the next weeks, the tunnel stopped being a place we waited to die and became a place we worked to live. We improved the choke points and cleared paths that let us move quietly. We expanded our water collection, placing multiple bins under seep points and boiling on a schedule. We created a system for waste that did not poison our own air. Grant rigged a simple airflow path with the shaft, using tarps and tape to encourage fresh air down and smoke up without relying on power. Marisol kept health rules strict, and people followed them because everyone had seen what happened when Daryl tried to turn fear into force. Ethan and Brooke became steady again. Brooke's cut healed. She started contributing without hesitation, hauling supplies, organizing, cleaning. Tessa became our quiet scout, moving through the tunnel with a discipline that made her hard to notice, which in that place was a skill. Walt stayed the anchor at the door, not because he wanted authority, but because he could handle hours of listening without inventing stories from every scrape. We did not pretend the tunnel was safe forever. We treated it as a home you can defend only if you keep respect for what it is. A tube, ends blocked. Darkness that hides problems. Sound that pulls danger. Sometimes we heard digging outside, maybe rock shifting, maybe other survivors trying to break in, maybe crews that never made it far. We never answered with shouting. We never fired flares. If someone wanted in, that person would have to find the shaft hatch above, and that meant effort and intention, not a panicked crowd. Months later, when the snow above thinned and the wind changed, we heard engines outside again. Not close, but real, the sound of a vehicle moving on a road that used to be dead. We sat in silence inside the alcove, listening, deciding what it meant. Rescue could be real. It could also be raiders. It could be a crew clearing rubble with no idea what waited at the tunnel mouths. We did not run out blindly. We waited. We watched through the shaft. We made sure our supplies were packed in case leaving became the smarter move. We kept our routines because routine is what kept us alive when everyone else inside that tunnel tried to solve fear with noise. I started this trap. I stayed alive by turning the trap into a system. The mountain sealed both ends and forced us to make decisions without outside help. The infected kept pressure on every mistake. People tested each other. Some broke, some adapted. The tunnel did not care about any of our opinions. It rewarded quiet work and punished performance. When I finally climbed the shaft again on a clear night and looked out over the dark slope above the highway, I did not feel heroic. I felt cautious. I felt responsible for a door and a water drip and a small group of people who understood what noise costs. The world beyond the tunnel was still there, still broken, still unpredictable. But for the first time since the outbreak began, I had a place that made sense. I had a home that was earned, not found.